Charlie needs to do his trick.
What was it?
Your trick?
I don't have a trick.
From the Chris's your challenge.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can't do that right now.
What is it?
It's just a basketball trick. It's one of our challenges on the youth engagement series where you just do some random trick shot. But
Nice.
it's pretty fun. This is a pretty cool song I've been listening to. Rich Girl by Bear Fox.
When I was a little girl, I helped my mother with the chores. Then I would go to the river to swim. We'd play tag and swim on a swim. I loved to feel the hot summer heat. Couldn't stand shoes upon my feet.
We'll be on in 8 minutes.
I am a rich girl, can't you see? My father was a farmer, hard working. He worked all day till the evening. His hands were calloused and full of strength. He didn't speak very much English. He was a well-respected man, knew his medicines and was very kind. He took care of his family. I am a rich girl, can't you see? My mother was the kindest you could meet. Her eyes, they sparkled and her smile so sweet. She loved babies, held them to her cheek. She made everyone feel unique. She was known for her butter and cream. So throughout our community, she made sure we had extra money. I am a rich girl, can't you see? Our house was very old. In the winter it was so cold. Wood-filled wood stove for our heat. Bundled in blankets we would sleep. People thought that we were poor because of the holes upon our floor. But I'm a rich girl, can't you see? So much love in our family. Now I have a family of my own. I try my best to guide them as they grow. Try my best to keep them from harm. Tell them stories about the farm. When it's time to turn off the lights, I tell them I love them and good night. Then I hold my husband tight. I know everything is going right. Both my parents have passed away, but I know I'll see them someday. I am grateful for my family. I am a rich girl, can't you see? I am grateful for my family. I'm a rich girl, can't you see?
Hey. How's my hair look?
So much love in our family. I'm a rich girl, can't you see? Closer.
Yeah, that was a song on YouTube from Represent, singing on campus. It doesn't say who was the artist, but 3 young Native women. Was actually, I heard these songs as part of my intro to NAS 104 class at HSU, and felt like it's appropriate since we're having a Native woman speaker today. So yeah, I think we're approaching the time of start, but we're still waiting on our speaker. Just kind of looking at the comments. So yeah, you guys are welcome for some music. I guess it's a good way to kind of get in the mindset and kind of get the the mind thinking. So I appreciate it myself. Hope you all do too. Yeah, so just bear with us here today. Yeah, I guess we can get started today. Hello, everyone. It's your host, Charlie Reed. It's been a minute since I've been on, so I appreciate y'all having me back. Today, we have a special guest, but before, we're going to take this time to kind of introduce who we have on today with us, starting with Virgil. Virgil, the stage is yours.
Hello, I'm Virgil. I've been a frequent guest on this speaker series and doing good. I'm the Behavioral Health Director at Two Feathers Native American Family Services, and I'm excited to be introducing Dr. Blyth Joy. She'll be joining us shortly. Turn it over to Shoshone.
Hi, Ayakwi. I am Shoshone Junsaw Hostler, and I am the new mental health therapist for Two Feathers Family Services. Hi,
Hello, can you guys hear
Dr.
me?
Blyth George. Yes, we can.
Let's see here.
You have perfect timing.
Excellent. I'm just going to put a note down real quick as we get going. But it looks like, are we already live? Can people
Yeah,
see?
yep.
Good to know. Okay, yeah, let me just write something real quick that I am here.
So Shoshone, what you were the new one of our new therapists, right?
Right. So I'm just finishing up my last 2 weeks or my last class today for my master's in psychology with the emphasis in counseling. So marriage and family therapist.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. And congratulations to you as well. What an accomplishment.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's definitely, I would say, I know you and I envisioned spring 2020 coming out a little different. But I don't know about you. I'm glad to have made it out. That's what it feels like. Like I'm coming. I'm right outrunning it.
Yeah, that's what we were joking about, having to take our comprehensive exam in the middle of a pandemic. So we'll always have some interesting stories about finishing up our program.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking someday we will, amongst other ways to have street cred with this whole thing. It's like I did this when all that went down. That's going to have some major street cred someday. People will know what you mean.
Right on. I enjoy the casual conversations we're getting ready for, but to bring it back here, I think Virgil wanted to introduce this in the right way. So Virgil.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. So, we are on the virtual Indigenous Speaker Series put on by Two Feathers Native American Family Services. We're located about 5.5 hours north of San Francisco, right on the beautiful Pacific Ocean. And I'm happy to introduce Dr. Blyth George, a recent graduate of Harvard University, and also a local to our community. She's a graduate of McKinleyville High School. She's also a graduate of Dartmouth University, who I personally have some mixed feelings towards, but that's a joke. But she also has a Ph.D. in sociology and social policy from Harvard University. She's been recognized by the National Science Foundation and really numerous other prestigious institutions. And, I think she's a who's who of upcoming Native academic intellectuals. She is currently a postdoc fellow in sociology at UC Berkeley as part of the Presidential Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. And one of the really exciting parts of having our conversation and Dr. George's presentation is it's relevant to our area. Her research and dissertation is one of the few that is locally based and really at a national level in the sense of recognition around the issues within Yurok, Hoopa, Karuk, Talawa people. So we're happy to have you, Dr. George.
Thank you so much. You can't beat that kind of introduction. It is really actually, I was kind of going through my presentation last night and I realized a really fun part about today is that, 9 times out of 10 when I'm making this presentation, I'm somewhere where, if they've heard of Humboldt, it has its own connotations. More often than not, they actually just don't even know our part of the world at all. So there's so much of time that I have to spend kind of making it real to them. And, I'm not gonna spare any of the razzle dazzle for you guys, but it is kind of nice to be talking about these things in a context of a place that people that get it. They understand what I'm going to be saying. And, I have to preface that also then that maybe if you know what I'm talking about, maybe I won't tell you anything new, but for me, it would be more important that what I tell you resonates maybe with what you have experienced in your lived experiences. So let's jump in if that works for you guys.
And yes,
do we want to introduce the rest of the panel, or did you guys already?
Yeah, we introduced everybody, and maybe we'll introduce a little bit of how today's going to go. Dr. George is going to share a presentation. And then after that, Charlie, myself, and Shoshone, and you will just have a sort of collaborative dialogue around some of your work and how it is relevant to our own community, including the local Native people of this area.
Uh-huh.
And so all you have to do is share the screen if you have like a PowerPoint, and I allowed you, so the little green button on the bottom, and it should be good to go.
Okay, oops, let me get this PowerPoint up from the start. I'm going to pretend like I'm not one of those old professors that doesn't know technology. I'm young, I'm hip, but seems like it never works when you're on the spot. But let's see here. Okay, so I'm trying to share the screen. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Can you guys see a PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay. Well then, oops, it's jumping ahead on me. Okie dokie. Well, if you guys are wondering, I'm joining you live from my family's home where I'm sheltering in place, hence the beautiful background I've got going on. But for me, it was important to come home with all the craziness in the world. And so to get this invitation to speak, for me, it's filling up my cup in a time where I think that's what we all need. So I'm really happy to be able to share my current project with all of you and, get some feedback, but also for the people who are watching this via Facebook Live, if you've known me, met me, or however you brought yourself here today, and you've always wondered what I do, here is a chance to kind of get a sneak peek of it. Now, the title, Conceptions of Work and the Body, Implications for the Labor Market Preferences of World Renewal Men with Criminal Records. This is, it's a little sociology. So this is tapping into my wheelhouse. And so what you're going to hear about today is basically how we as World Renewal Gotta get that out. As world renewal people, how we conceive of work and of the place of the body in particular, how that might be drawn from our spiritual orientations, but how it also has implications for our labor force attachment. And generally speaking, if we go into our motivations here, as a sociologist, I come from a discipline that has spent a lot of time looking at urban poverty or concentrated disadvantage in a usually Chicago South Side is like a big example. And when I went away for college, I was really struck how I would be sitting in lonely New Hampshire, snow on the ground, hate this place, and I'd be reading about Chicago's South Side, and some of the things really resonated with the experience I had had growing up, as well as what I knew of my peers both on and off reservation. But at the same time, I didn't quite see my loved ones, my dad, my brothers, my moms, my sisters. I didn't see them in this context, but I could see a lot of really fruitful connections. And so that's where my work kind of jumps off. How do we take what we've so far understood in an urban setting? How do we apply that to a rural reservation context? Why that matters is because the people back east who dole out the money, this is how they listen. And you got to tie it back to what they already know. And so I've hitched my wagon to what they call stratification literature or concentrated disadvantage, which is basically kind of a line of thought that looked at all the fallout after the manufacturing industry declined in the 20th century in Chicago. It was a peak labor force, and where men who hadn't even graduated high school could support their families very well working at a manufacturing industry. There was global shifts, all of these things outside of their control changed, and they lost their jobs. And over time, we saw that the connection between individuals and kind of clocking in 9 to 5, that became weakened. These things came apart. And in that context, bad things go together. So we see increases in unemployment as a first rate consideration. We see increases in poverty. We see increases in crime. And, I think if you know something about our area, some of this might ring a bell in the context of the logging and fishing industry declines that we've had over the last 30 to 40 years. Now, the redwood industry was really lucky that we were somewhat delayed in terms of the natural resource industry decline across the country. But if you guys know this area, I myself, as the daughter of a logger, I saw the decline of the logging industry in my time. And I thought that maybe we could jump in to understand this experience, because similar to urban areas, we haven't seen women struggle as much to find employment in the context of this deindustrialization or industry decline. It's been men that have kind of struggled to find resonant employment, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. And in particular, if we think of joblessness and then mass incarceration, criminal justice impact by its very nature is one of the ways employers kind of ding people when they've made their choices, but they're trying to get right and they're looking for work. They're often barred from employment for work that they could very easily do, but it's because of their criminal record. Now, if you have an economy like ours that's already what they call slack, you're going to be in a position where there's already more applicants than any one employer can accommodate. So they thin the stack in these certain ways. And I think the reservation definitely has an experience of this. The larger 2-county area has an experience of this. And so I wanted to bring us to the table and be a part of this discussion. Now, in particular, I posed the following research question: what explains the continued engagement of tribal men with the world of work despite overlapping structural and individual constraints? Now you're going to hear more about why I came to this question over the course of the presentation. But I think that anyone who's listening to this might appreciate that even men who have criminal records, who have substance dependencies, that when they are sober, which is a whole conversation in itself, that it's very hard to find a tribal guy that's not working. Like they show up, especially tribal fathers, they show up for their families if they have an ability to, and they're tenacious in their pursuit of that. When they're not, something's wrong, and we have to dig deeper. But I can't say it's for lack of an attachment to work. And so that to me was really an interesting juxtaposition. And so I kind of jumped in there. This is my study area. I don't have to belabor this slide to you guys. This looks familiar, but it was important for me to consider both the Yurok and Hoopa Valley tribal reservations as linked entities. We have so much of a shared cultural heritage, although we do have our individual specifics. But when it comes to kind of historical circumstance, as well as perhaps economic context, we share enough things that for the purpose of this investigation, I consider us together, although I do make key distinctions where relevant. Now, I did include the Del Norte and Humboldt County regions at large because I really wanted to compare the experiences of those who lived on reservation to off reservation as to where there was a qualitative difference between the two. Now, that's sociologists always having to have their theoretical point of variation. Now, to dive into how I did this and how, you know, some of you may have came to know me, excuse me, I say not COVID. You can't cough nowadays without people wondering. But community-based participatory research is something that I fundamentally orient my work within. Now, the great majority of academic research on tribal communities up until, let's say, the last 30 years or less has been very extractive. It's been exploitive. It's been taking our knowledge and honestly not coming back with anything to show for it. They're just taking. And I think that that's not the kind of work I want to produce, and that thankfully there is a rich history in peer disciplines that have already kind of wrestled with this. And so I, as a sociologist, borrow these tools from Indigenous studies and other disciplines, and community-based participatory research is one such example, where from the earliest days of my dissertation, which is the foundation of the project you're hearing today, I was working with the tribal community to design everything from the ground up. I was looking at who was watching. I have some people who were instrumental in helping this whole thing get off the ground, who kept me humble and told me what I was doing right, but also what I was doing wrong. And I wouldn't have been able to do all of my accomplishments over the last couple of years if it weren't for that. Now, it takes time. You know, if I just popped in and, you know, even if I was from McKinleyville, I'm Yurok, yeah, okay, I'm listening. But like, tell me more, like, show me you're here for something, that you're here for the long haul. And thankfully, I'm from McKinleyville. You couldn't shake me if you tried. And I actually was fortunate enough to partner with the Yurok Justice Center and the Tribal Court in particular over the course of 30 months, if you can believe it. They might not even realize from end to end, it was that long. And over that course of time, we identified who would be eligible to participate in my project. I also had firsthand knowledge of the inner workings of what is truly, in my opinion, a cutting edge, nation leading facility in terms of how they enact therapeutic jurisprudence, as well as their holistic case management of anyone who comes in the door. They are on your side. And I wanted to house my work within that. Now, I also attended seasonal dance observations, particularly during the time that I was doing my interviews. If you're wondering why I look familiar, you might have seen me there. Although after sleeping in my car, I'm not usually this glammed up. But I also, you know, festivals as well as funerals and the free time in between. You know, I'm from this area, so it was important to me that I didn't rest on that credential, and the people back east won't let me. So I instead wanted to launch like a really specific ethnographic time period where I was observing homes through different eyes, through the eyes of an empirical scientist. And so that is the kind of foundation for my interview-based data, which comprises approximately 35 cases. One person is one case. I wanted to focus on tribal fathers with criminal records for a couple reasons. I hypothesized that, as I said earlier, you know, we know a lot based on the urban literature when it comes to the connections between unemployment, crime, and poverty, right? But we don't know about it in a rural scenario, but we do know that men with criminal records have kind of been really at the crux of multiple layers of marginalization. And so I wanted to find a proximal group in our communities, coupled with the knowledge that, you know, I don't know if he's watching, but I love my dad to death. I can't say he is not without some past indiscretions. And nonetheless, he maintained a formal work history. And so I knew from growing up that just because someone has a criminal record doesn't mean they're not working hard for their families. And if they are fathers, they're going to have skin in the game when it comes to mouths to feed, but they're going to be effectively looking for work with one hand tied behind their back because of the stigma associated with their criminal record. So by tapping into those guys in particular, I could speak to some kind of different patterns that we've known from the theory of it, but then also what's going on in our part of the world. Now, I could only do this after working with the tribal court to kind of get an understanding of the scope of who might be eligible for a project like this, in terms of a tribally enrolled person who's a father and who has a criminal history in one way or one shape, form, or another. Now, nobody wants to be on that list. It's not a way to ding anybody up. If anything, it helps us do our jobs better, because we can't provide services if we don't know our service population. And so a big part of being able to do the interviews was just establishing some kind of quantitative baseline and a working pool from which I could draw randomly. And from there, also get other people, referral-based recruitment, such as that. Now, this stuff is a little more technical, but it is important to note that as much as I came in with a lot of theories from the theories from the literature, I it'd be dumb to act like everything in Chicago applies to Humboldt County, let alone the reservation. So it was really important that even as I had a lot of ideas and questions coming in, that I was really attuned to what I was seeing on the ground in the field. And so there was kind of an iterative process of having my hypotheses, my questions, having them rub up against what I was seeing, and then trying to find a way to interpret this, and going back and forth with this process over the course of months. Now, you can kind of see where this shows up in my dissertation recruitment in particular. You can see here there's roughly a 2-to-1 split between those on reservation as compared to off reservation. That was on purpose. I wanted to theoretically sample heavily on a very unstudied experience, even though rural areas more generally are also vastly unstudied. Now, understudied, excuse me. But over the course of interviews, it became clear that those who lived downriver in the most remote portions of the reservation, whether it be Wichipec, Shregon, Pequon, these areas were kind of, those who lived there had access to a qualitatively different experience, even as compared to those who lived in the reservation town sites of Klamath and Hoopa. So I wanted to kind of select men in that category as well, to make sure that I was speaking to an experience that resonated around the reservation, regardless of where we're talking about in particular. I was also recruiting men off reservation. So you see here Crescent City, as well as Eureka and McKinleyville. Again, this was for a total of 35 respondents. And if you only knew how hard it was to track each of these fellas down, but I'm happy to say I actually had a 100% retention rate. And I could not be more grateful to the guys who, it takes a lot to talk to a stranger. They could have said nothing and still gotten the incentive, gotten the snacks, gotten everything, the jerky. If they know, they know. And they went so much farther than that. And, to my credit, I'm pretty good at what I do, but I have to thank my respondents, because without their candor and their buy-in and their desire to improve their community for their children and their children's children, I wouldn't be speaking today about the things I'm able to talk about. Nor my larger research agenda. So I can't overstate that enough. Now, I'm just doing a quick time check, because this was previously a longer presentation, but I'm trying to cut it down. But I think we're on track. I want to remind us, though, of our original research question, which is what explains the continued engagement of tribal men with the world of work, despite overlapping structural and individual constraints. Now, what you'll see here is kind of a table I've hypothesized. You're going to recognize a lot of what you see here, but part of my task as a sociologist is to take what's real in our world and show it in a way that the eyes back east can interpret it. And so that's what this table does here. I pose something called a world renewal worldview, which is fundamentally based on our spiritual orientations. I posit the existence of frames, which is kind of the way someone views the world or how they think about things, along with corresponding kind of behaviors or strategies of action that go together. And I believe they come from our world renewal worldview. And in particular, I've offered ones that relate to labor force attachment or the world of work. Now, because I believe this is going to explain why we might see different relationships between unemployment and labor force attachment on reservation than elsewhere. Now you can see here I have the frame of the primacy of the land and the rivers. This is a fundamental component of the World Renewal worldview, and I believe it manifests in not only the fact that so many men cluster in natural resource employment, both past and present, but also the desire for those who live in the most remote portions of the reservation, who live off-grid and who maintain their energy and their food sovereignty as a household. You know, if you have family members that do this, if you were taught to live this way growing up, these are certain kind of values and behaviors that, you know, I can assure you that they don't have in the city, but I believe is connected with how we think of work. Quite honestly, to live in that part of the world, you're working every day, whether you're clocking in or not. And those skills can be translated into labor force boons if you have the right kind of job. Now, I also point to the power in maintaining balance, which is a frame I believe is expressed in the ceremonial dancing and singing, as well as practices of prayer and fasting. Now, I don't have to tell you guys, but we do know that we as World Renewal people, men in particular, were expected to steward the local environment. We were expected to maintain the balance, and we participate in different ceremonies that affirm that balance. And in many ways, these are deeply meaningful to the men who participate in them, and they actually they draw from the body in a way that is almost a physical sacrifice. If you've seen jump dance, days and days under the hot sun, no food, vigorous motions all day, I can't imagine. I have so much respect for those who do that kind of ceremonial work for all of us, and so. And now you might be asking, what about the ladies? Because I was like, think about the camp. There's all kinds of stuff going on there too. That is such a hugely important question. I'd be happy to talk about that more later, but that's part 2. That's where I'm going next. So if you ladies are wondering, what about me? I'll be coming back around. But nonetheless, these are all different ways where men were actually drawing from their physical bodies to enact their worldview, which is not typically how we in sociology have understood cultural expressions thus far. I also believe it ties back to the expectation of men as Numi Pergerk. This is something I credit Thomas Buckley's Standing Ground, hugely amazing work. And he kind of talks to the point that we as Yurok people, World Renewal people, in our respective languages, we had ways of distinguishing between men as kind of a gender category and then men who were real men. Numi Pergerk meant that you were both taking care of the physical well-being of your family, but their sacred well-being as well, that you built your physical, your material wealth alongside your sacred wealth. For many, these were one and the same. And I believe that this expectation is continued to manifest in present day, passed down over many generations. And we see it in the commitment to fathers as providers, and it's kind of a generational work ethic and expertise that goes with it, passed down from father to son. And with that, the bodily service of a father providing for their families, that's a World Renewal trait that goes back well before the logging industry, well before any of those vocations that we do so extremely well, because it taps into our fundamental orientations already. Now, I'm going to go through a couple quotes to give you guys an example. I didn't want to run over time. I'm thinking I probably already will. So if I seem to pick up a pace a bit from here on out, that's why. But I am keeping an eye just so that we can have a good question and answer session. Now, for guys like Johnny, he came from downriver. His family, Blue Creek, Tule Creek, these are areas that were very important to him and his family. And he actually sought these areas out to live because he wanted to support his family with his own 2 hands. He wanted to live off grid, and he wanted to maintain a subsistence lifestyle. And for him, you know, the people back east are like, why? Like, if you can live somewhere where there's power, why would you do this? And you can see that for guys that live in this part of the world, you know, that's just life. Someday you would hope actually not to need to go to town as much. But if the power goes out, you have what you need for a while. In town, they're all broke down without power. But if we're doing it right, like how I was taught, my family, we'd be okay for at least a week, hopefully longer. Now, this is I don't have to, I probably said that a couple times, but I think you guys might recognize this. And if you have family members who live up off grid, downriver, that they crave that. They seek this area out. You know, if you don't want to live like that, the coast is just a couple hours away. There's always an option to opt out of living in areas that require you to maintain your energy and your food sovereignty. Yet it is an important part of the World Renewal worldview that individuals and their families enact to present day, right? Now, if we look at a more tangible expression, perhaps, of the World Renewal worldview, I think our dances and our singing, our ceremonies come to mind. Even to the outside observer, tribal men are quite prominent, right, in our dance ceremonies. This is not to say that women are not, but that there is a responsibility placed on men as regalia holders, as singers, and as dancers that is palpable, and is something that my respondents, regardless of their employment status, regardless of their criminal history, they took deep meaning from this, and rightly so, in my opinion. And, you know, for guys like Brad, he says, you know, the jump dance up there in Pequon, my family's kind of the ones that like run that, and they have for a long time. So I've always, you know, since I could walk, I guess, I've participated in that jump dance. So, you know, I've been involved in that jump dance for a long time. I've danced brush dance a few times, and mainly I'm a high dance person, is what I usually try to say. You know, jump dance, I've been born in. I've done it since I was a baby. So, you know, and I know everything there is to know about jump dance. Now, this would be the part in the presentation where I tell you the difference between a jump dance and a brush dance. I'm going to rely on my audience that that's not a point I have to go into, but you can see here that by calling himself a jump dancer, he was directly linking his identity to the responsibility to maintain the balance in the environment, in the world. And at the same time, he took pride that that was a family responsibility passed down to him, and actually one that he shared with his children, and that he was very, very proud that his children both had access to their jump dance heritage, but also their brush dance heritage through his partner. Now, I bring this up to show, you know, this in many ways, the body is where my respondents were interpreting their worldview or enacting it. Dances, singing, these are physical acts that, you know, you have to see to believe in some small part, but for my respondents, it was a guiding light and something they oriented their lives around every season that, you know, that doesn't show up in the books in sociology, you know, more generally. Now, to kind of close this point on maintaining balance, I want to point to the prayer and the fasting that men like Keith engaged in, you know, and how he points to the fact that you're giving something up from your body is what makes your prayer stronger. He says, I think it's more like a spiritual thing. Like you do that kind of stuff and it's like nothing can stop you. You're a stronger person, even though people think it's weak because they fast and stuff. But no, it's more intense. It gives more balance. That's what fasting does. It makes you appreciate things. That way you don't take advantage. When you do, your mind is on food, but then that's also why you fast, because you're giving up something for prayer to make your medicine stronger. Now, this process of making your medicine stronger is actually, you know, extracting from the body. It's an act of sacrifice. And Keith cultivated this not only in himself, but in his children. They were a very tight-knit family that lived off reservation, and they took great pride in being seen as a traditional household. And it was because Keith took it upon himself to shepherd both the physical well-being of his children, but their sacred well-being as well. Now, for others, as much as they had access to dances and prayer, men like Quinn, he knew the World Renewal worldview through work. He knew it because his father had passed work ethic and expertise down to him. And in a way, sometimes his dad was actually absent growing up, that a lot of their talking came later as men on the job working side by side. And, you know, Quinn asked his dad one day, why weren't you around? You know, we are obviously getting along really good right now. It wasn't a matter of not wanting to be there. So why weren't you there? And Quinn's father had to say, you don't know what it feels like when you go get your kids a popsicle and you have to put it back because you don't have enough to get them all one. You don't know. Now, Quinn's father had grown up in the Depression. So for him, he almost craved work. But for him, it had a very specific purpose, supporting a family of 10. So, you know, he knew what it was like to not have enough money for 10 popsicles. And so he worked night and day. He was a successful entrepreneur, and he had passed those skills on to his sons and his grandsons. And they in turn used those same skills in their work, their job search, what have you. Now, these are all different ways that we see the world renewal worldview manifesting in kind of a way that would be a benefit to labor force attachment, right? These are skill sets that should find their corresponding match in the labor force. Now, this isn't always the case, and I think it's because participation is mediated by place in a way that we might actually find somewhat counterintuitive. Now, we see a tension between the labor force attachment of my respondents and the slack local labor markets that we live in, coupled with their own negative credentials. As I said, you know, my respondents were selected because they had criminal records. Most of them, 6 out of 10, had graduated at high school. 9 out of 10 identified as being substance dependent at some point in their lives, with a significant portion of the sample actually having entered treatment as recently as the year before their interviews. Now, they also, you know, lacking a driver's license was an impediment to finding work. And also it seemed like something that employers were actually holding against them in ways that didn't make sense if they weren't, you know, going to be driving on the job. So they're, you know, they've got what we call kind of human capital constraints, yet it was very rare that I found someone who wasn't working if they were sober. Now that's a precondition, that's a whole other discussion, but sobriety was a necessary kind of backdrop to seeking employment. But if anything, it was more common to find a guy who was using and still working rather than someone who was unemployed and completely sober and just sitting on the couch at home. We didn't have guys like that. To our credit, that wasn't the case. If they weren't working, there was other things going on. Nonetheless, 77% of my respondents were employed or seeking work at the time of their interview. They clustered in the industries of forestry, wildfire firefighting, and fisheries. That's because this kind of work is deeply resonant, in my opinion, with the World Renewal worldview, as well as the bodily knowledge and the technical know-how that comes with that. Drug and alcohol treatment and rehabilitation were also increasingly resonant employment options. I believe that it is a matter of meaning making as well, that these jobs provide generative opportunities or opportunities to invest in the future or the health and well-being of their peers in a way that is also, particularly for tribal men, you know, there is a male-to-male fellowship that is also a fundamental part of the worldview. And so drug and alcohol treatment and rehabilitation was well suited to those kinds of opportunities. Now, men like Chris made his living as a redwood entrepreneur or commercial fisherman, depending on the season. I won't go into his quote in great detail, but here he links having gotten off drugs and getting right with the Great Spirit. He was a spiritual man, and you know, he knew he died and come back many times on the job. It was just a hazard of the game, part of felling timber, redwoods, commercial fishing, incredibly dangerous work. But our guys climb aboard like it's second nature, because it is. And you know, Chris, as much as he was so proud to have this skill set and to have built the house that his family lived in, he also was kind of having to reckon with the fact that it was really the only work he could do as someone who dropped out of high school, who'd previously, you know, basically almost went away for a life sentence after a third strike. These were all things that kind of limited his ability to pursue formal employment, but to be an entrepreneur, he could most definitely do. And he had access to the physical resources of the reservation in a way that facilitated this. Now, others like Matthew from earlier kind of took his skill set gained from, you know, living with grandma on the reservation for the summers. He took all that bodily know-how and that work ethic and applied it to work in the fire industry. It was run strict, boom, be there on time, like boom, boom, boom. You know, fisheries is a little different, but you know, it's cool. In his mind, this was both a way of being trained, but also a personal ethos that he brought to the job that was equal parts, you know, technical training from the fire service or forest service, but then also his bodily knowledge, having grown up on reservation and having to take care of his family off grid. Now, you can see I'm kind of flying through these, But for men like Orion, work and recovery made more sense. And it was actually, you know, he wanted to be on the reservation, even though it was something that was arguably deeply triggering. Person, places, and things were everywhere. But for him, I'm very proud to be from here. I think I'm respected in this community, meaning that it kind of reinforces the idea that what I've chose to do and the path I've actually traveled was worth it. It was worth it because now I get to come back and show anybody and everybody that wants to be inspired or wants to share in recovery or wants to know how to do what I'm doing. I'm like a walking example on how to do so. And I'm always available to give insight, to help see from different eyes, a different perception. Now, this is an ethos that many of the men who worked in recovery shared. And I think that, in my opinion, that's how we're going to find our way through the drug dependencies that we have on reservation. It's not going to be a matter of someone from the outside healing us. It's going to be us healing each other with the tools we've always had. And I'm really happy to have shared space with men who are already putting this kind of work in practice, and, you know, even members of the Two Feathers staff. So hopefully a resonant audience, right? Now, for those who lived off reservation, the story was a little different. They came with the same kind of bodily knowledge and technical skill set, but they couldn't find the receptive employers. There wasn't the resources to do it themselves as entrepreneurs. They were more likely to get gummed up in background checks or other screening mechanisms. And ultimately, they were kind of bashing their head against a wall of kind of lack of employer receptivity when it came to finding work. For guys like Byron, even when they did find work, it chafed against the fact that, you know, he was working minimum wage or maybe even a little more than a minimum wage. But for a father of 5, you know, that doesn't go very far. And as a drug dealer previously, he knew he could make so much more money by making just one call. But he also knew it would wind him up in a cell or death. And by his count, he'd spent 7 of the last 10 years in the county jail, which, you know, Humboldt County Jail, that's a long time. And it was because of drug crimes and kind of cycling in and out. But as he and his partner chose to pursue recovery together, they welcomed a newborn soon after. He was trying to turn the page, but he'd be lying if he said this wasn't always something in the back of his mind. For others like Raymond, he didn't care what kind of job he had to get, even if it meant physically exhausting himself. You know, he worked 25 miles a day, walked 25 miles a week, as a member of a brushing crew. And, you know, he shouldn't have been doing that kind of work. He actually had been hit by a car in a head-on collision, wound up in the back seat with injuries so bad that he says, you know, after my record, I knew I couldn't do just any job. Like right now I'm suffering with my whole injuries. Like this thing, like it hurts. I'm walking these trails and I'm acting like I'm not hurting, but it's like keeping my family in mind, you know? It's like, without me doing this, we're not going to have a lot. We're not going to be able to really make it up here. Now, they had the option to move back to the reservation with family, but they wanted to be in town, both for the amenities and the options it offered, but also for the process of kind of regaining custody of his 2 eldest children. And so for Raymond and his wife, Retta, being in town was a matter of proximity, but it also, you know, it had to fit what they wanted to do as a household. And they wanted her in the home. They had children, 4 under the age of 10, 1 on the way. All of these things meant that Retta wanted to be in the home too. And if Raymond couldn't find work, they were going to have to move back to the reservation. Now, someone from the outside looking in might say, you know, why doesn't he just work at Walmart? Why doesn't he work at the gas station? Well, he tried. First off, his skill set is different. But secondly, as his wife suspects, he's phenotypically native, which is also a ding. And she felt that even though she potentially had more serious offenses in her life, that she was better able to find work than her husband because she was not as phenotypically tribal. Now, all of this is what I hope I've offered here is kind of this world renewal worldview as a way to interpret the labor market behaviors and choices of the respondents in my pool, men who might be like some of your family members, maybe like yourselves at different points in your life. And ultimately, you know, I offer the worldview as a source of narrative, sense making, and of resilience, because this is a huge source of strength that we have access to that there just isn't a parallel to in an urban scenario. Now, it's a source of social resilience is what we've called it as sociologists, but I would encourage us to look at kind of survivance and the intimate relationship between resilience and adversity that has been theorized by peer disciplines. I also offer the body as a site of cultural analysis. As I said earlier, the vast majority of cultural sociology focuses on words and how we say our culture, how we do it that way. And I don't think that resonates with the World Renewal Worldview. Some of it's talked out, but so much of this is through the body. And so we need to have space for that. And I'm really fortunate that work in Indigenous feminisms is speaking to this. So I'm not without some guide as I try to bring this into the kind of sociological discussion. Now, even as I theorize, I want to provide points of intervention, because these are our families and our communities we're talking about. We need to invest in the green jobs and the other resident employment options that our men are looking for. They're not going to go work at the casino, like just stop asking them or expecting them to. They need to have work that's going to resonate with their skill set and their meaning making. But we also have to reckon with climate change considerations. But I've always said that if we have to be out spritzing the redwoods to make sure they stay alive, like, we'll be there. That's our job. But we need the green jobs and the money to back it up. We also need increased investment in mental health services and dual diagnosis facilities. Not only would this provide opportunities in generative positions in recovery for employment, but when someone has a drug addiction and PTSD, these are co-occurring conditions. These require a specific kind of facility, which I don't have to tell you guys is few and far between in rural areas, let alone on a reservation. And we need to make that right. And that's a matter of the right money in the right places. Now, I also call upon tribal governments as tribal employers on and off reservation. We are gumming up the works for some of our guys to get employment in ways that is foolish. And we can't ask other employers to ask our guy or to hire our guys if we're not willing to do so first. So if we have ways where we can eliminate some of these unnecessary obstacles, it's within our latitude to do it yesterday, so we need to. In conclusion, I've offered you guys just a sliver of my larger research agenda. Ultimately, I hope to produce a book project that will draw on qualitative methodologies crafted with rural tribal reservation communities to study the intersection of place, stratification, and resilience. I also, with my work with the Tribal Court and the Sovereign Bodies Institute, and am working to enhance the data infrastructure and analysis capacities of Yurok country, of Humboldt and Delaware counties, and other rural reservation areas like that. Ultimately, I'm going to help sociology see us, whether they want to or not. And thank you, Waklau, for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, let me turn off screen sharing, right?
Yep.
Okay. I can do this. I'm smart. Okay. Here it is. Here it is. Oh, you got it. You got it. Boom. Did you stopped it? Yeah.
Yep, we got it. Now we're on speaker view. Great presentation. That was awesome. Very inspiring, and just, the amount of work that you put into it and the sort of dedication to the craft and becoming an expert is truly impressive. So thank you for that. And I think, our community who's watching, I'm pretty sure they're going to be grateful too for your work. And so I'm going to ask the first question, just as a follow-up to your presentation, is, I guess, like, where do you see schools come into this? A lot of what we're doing at Two Feathers is working within the schools. And one thing and I work a lot with young Native men, right? Adolescents, and the classes, the curriculum doesn't really speak to what I took from your presentation of the interest of some of the Native males. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious how you went about that or understood that in your dissertation and your research.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of my guys kind of opted out of school early on. I think that's on us when kids drop out. And when I first got into, just being a researcher, education was kind of my first love, I always say. I actually worked with the P16 Council, which was, I think it's still up and running, but it looked at education kind of pre-K through college completion. And, I say this because I've seen examples where we can do it right. And I was actually really proud that a lot of those examples were happening in Humboldt, in Hoopah, like we have some baller school districts and teachers who go above and beyond for their students. But I do think that, you know, we have to open the door for the curriculum that resonates. And I actually, I don't know if you guys were familiar with the Klamath River Early College of the Redwoods that was in Klamath for a long time. They had a really innovative curriculum that actually provided credits for eeling, for basketry, for a plethora of cultural activities that, you know, it's a shame that if that school is not in existence, that we don't have that curriculum elsewhere, because maybe there's some hope of reeling kids back in before they decide to drop out. That being said, you know, what was really nice about the logging industry was that you didn't have to have a high school degree to do good work. And like a lot of these jobs, like I got all the book learning in the world, I'd get us all killed if you put me on the landing, you know? So there's, as much as I am all about college education and pushing our students to consider their higher education options, I also have always been a big proponent of vocational education. I actually did FFA in agriculture all of high school. And I think that, you know, we have to have the jobs waiting for guys that have that kind of technical skill and that know-how. And, you know, right now we're kind of at a crossroads. You know, do you need a high school degree to fight a fire? You know, is that a hard credential if you know how to do everything else? Those are things that we as employers on the other side can kind of tinker with. And I'm happy to say that a lot of guys find those opportunities through family and through peers who can vouch for them, you know, regardless of their school housing. Yeah.
Thank you.
But go to school. God, it's a lonely world as a native, a Yurok out in the world. And so I've always said that I couldn't love home as much as I did without leaving. I didn't realize how special Humboldt was. I was from here. Like everybody's got trees like this, got an ocean, a river, like what you mean. And that's not the case by a long shot. And so, yeah, you know, go to school, get the degree, man, come back home, do something with it. We need those biologists to be Yurok or Hoopa, Karuk. That needs to be who's running the ship. I mean, I like the other ones too.
It's really, I really appreciate this work because, you know, coming from a rural area up in the Kadu country where there's no cell phone service similar to downriver, and I went to school so then I could be in an opportunity to where I can't afford to live. I can't afford to kind of have a select job because there's far and few between. And so that's important about this study. And it means a lot to me just knowing that there's some sort of validation in your work. There's some sort of like sense of healing. And so I'm just wondering, how did your interviewees feel with like this study that you conducted?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question and for feeling maybe seen in some way through this work. You know, I grew up on the coast in McKinleyville, but my dad, who might be watching, is actually from the Forks of Salmon. He's an enrolled member of the Creek tribe. And, you know, I only have my camping cred in that part of the world, but I do have an appreciation for it. And so it's, that's why when I went, you know, and was interviewing people, it was like, you know, I got to talk to some guys downriver or Orleans, like that is different even than living in Hoopa or Klamath. And I can't, you know, I said this earlier, I can't overstate how generous my respondents were. That, you know, don't get me wrong, the first hour was often a matter of me staring at them and asking questions with yes and no answers. But I had different ways where I would kind of warm them up or soften them up, depending on what you think of it. And, you know, we would share a meal together. We would kind of cultivate a relationship that wasn't just me with some questions over here and I'm judging you on your answers. That's not what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, let me see through your eyes so that some of the stuff that makes your life harder, maybe I could speak to it so that it's not like that for son, for grandson, you know, and for me, this is for dad, for brother, for maybe my son someday. And so these considerations, were made plain from the beginning. I had to cultivate buy-in, and I had to get them invested in a way that they were being as honest and open as they could, even though more often than not, they had just met me for the first time that morning. I was really lucky, though, that I had the help of the tribal court, as well as key informants, as the sociology literature would call them, friends and people I loved who helped me make the connections I needed for this kind of work. And I also, I have family members who are part of the recovery community that even as I tried to give my street cred every other way, once they found out who my loved ones were, they understood why I was there sitting in front of them asking my questions, and they were all in, which was something that still kind of gets me emotional, because they could have, like I said, they didn't have to say nothing, and they said, once I got them going, more often than not, I just had to listen, which was a real privilege. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's an important thing to consider as a researcher, even though, because I'm conducting current research, or I'm about to this summer, and it's just like an interesting and kind of unique position to be in, as being a community member, but also kind of being in this like newer like role as being like a research social scientist. And it's kind of, it's a blessing. I think that relationship will
Everybody got quiet all of a sudden. I started asking questions. They just close up. Let alone getting the recorder out. Oh no, I don't even know you now.
Right. And so I think that goes a long ways, in academia, just having a deeper relationship and understanding that, oftentimes outside of the community members just can't be, as much as they are kind-hearted and good people trying to do good. It really does make a difference for being a member in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. That's something that I always like to ask about, is what those interactions look like, because it does make a difference.
Yes. And, I'm extending this to you as well as anyone who's listening. If you have questions about what I've done or how I did it, because you want to embark on this same kind of work, long term, I see myself being a professor. I'm going to be teaching people how to do this stuff. And I can't tell you how amazing it would be to help people, do this kind of work in God's country. So if I can ever be of any assistance, hit me up. I know you will have my email. The rest of you can find me online, I'm sure.
I appreciate that. And I know that Shoshone has a pretty good question for you as well.
Yeah, there are a couple different points that I kind of wanted to point out with your work. So first, I think it's a fantastic model. So if you're talking about teaching, I think it is a fantastic model for other people to understand and to move that forward. I appreciated how you wrote about it in a way that was for both, right? It's something that we can appreciate here as the natives from this community, and also there was a lot of relevance to your work and to the people that you also had to speak to as well, like on the East Coast, you're saying from the East Coast. So I appreciated how you were able to incorporate that, from an Indigenous scholar doing that work, because it is really important. Research is really important. And oftentimes we do kind of overlook that because of the way that it has traditionally been done. And so this is an example of how to do it in a very appropriate and respectful way. So that came across in your writing. And then also, the role of fatherhood in general, like in finding ways to define success, right? So like in a way, like the labor market is one aspect, but just being able to define a successful person or a successful male in a different way that is how we would see them, right? It is how we see them. So I think that's part of what your work does too. And that interests me because in the field of mental health and therapy, like I want those people to appreciate the work that they have put in, and at that see that as part of their identity moving forward, because I think when that doesn't get translated, we see our higher rate of suicidality in our communities, and in so much of social work and just working with families, right? We kind of set it up to, in my opinion, we kind of set it up to provide resources for women and children. And it's so important to include the father and the father role in all of that. So I don't know if you were able to catch Dallas and then Teresa's talks too, but so it's interesting. I think your work kind of ties it all together really nicely. And I know at the end you said including women in the future and kind of how that kind of plays out. So I guess my question would be, moving forward, like what can we do on the grounds? I know that some of the things that you proposed were more like a policy and like larger movements, but also what can we do on the grounds to kind of incorporate some of the things that you were able to find in your research? And then what's next for you also?
Well, gosh, thank you for those questions. I also thank you for taking a peek at the writing. I know it's dense, and so I love having people tell me what they think, because it's only going to get better that way. So thank you for taking a look. And that for me, in the book someday I will reflect on this too, is that a lot of this was because I didn't see my dad in the literature. Like, I saw pieces of him, but I didn't see my dad, and I didn't see men like him. And I didn't, if people back in DC aren't seeing him because the book's not there, then we're not going to get the help we need. And so much of the funds and the grants that we, should be our name on them already, there's a matter of having to make the case. And so I see my work as being kind of in that line of thinking. And so when it comes to what we can do day to day, I don't want to point back on the tribe so much, but there's two things I have problems with. And if they're wrong, please correct me. Or if we've since changed them, good on us. But there's something in HOOPA called the Title 30A, if I'm not mistaken, that I understand the rationale for such policies. I also understand that much of the decision-making in certain hiring protocols is tied to grant funding. That being said, we are perhaps adopting a much stricter version of keeping ourselves safe than we need to, and that's putting up an unnecessary wall for our guys. And I can't tell guys to get clean, to be doing right by family, and then say go get a job, and then you're getting dinged by your own tribe for things outside of your control. And that to me is an easy fix. It's within our discretion to do that. I think the Yurok tribe has its own equivalent of this in the driving background checks that are relatively expansive and arguably not always necessary depending on the position. I would extrapolate this to all employers. The degree to which an individual needs a driver's license or has a driving privilege, like that shouldn't be a factor for employment. And right now, I think it's, we've banned the box. Employers aren't allowed to ask about certain things, but they're getting, they're crafty. They find other ways. And it's called statistical discrimination, actually, when I think I know certain things about you based on this other thing I know. And we're using driver's licenses like that in this area. Now, if someone can't get to work after you've hired them because they ain't got a job or ain't got a ride, cross that bridge when it comes, but don't gum them up unnecessarily. And I think that in the context of our current Slack economy, we're enforcing that credential a little too hard, especially when we're not in a place that has viable public transportation by and large. At least not to the rhythms that you need to maintain formal employment and your other responsibilities. So I would also find ways that, even as I've told this amazing story, I'm a woman looking in, because there's a huge component of this that is going to take place in male-to-male fellowship. And so if this is a part of your current agenda, or if there's some ways you can enhance these capacities already under your purview, those both gender-based fellowship is something that there's ways we can heal each other. And in those spaces, there's something really sacred created. And I'm happy to say that we have many pockets of this already. So if there's ways to, and it sucks because with everything right now, you can't all get and sweat together. So it's finding ways to virtually facilitate that for the time being, but in the long term, really putting in the money and the resources to make sure that people have a sweat to go to, have a meeting to go to, because even the best that we can do, if you go into the city, any time of day, any day of the week, there's an AA meeting going on or NA, and like we don't have that. I don't know if we could have that, but we could enhance what we already have. And we're lucky that we have it. We're not starting from scratch by a long shot. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Definitely.
And what I'm doing next, I'm at Berkeley. I'm in my postdoc, which gives me dedicated time to turn what we've been talking about into a book without having to also teach and grade and all that goes with it. I see myself ideally accepting an academic position in the near future so that I would continue to do this kind of work within the wheelhouse of academia. I have considered working in a non-academic position, but in the short term, you know, if I can get tenure, I can do whatever the hell I want after that. So I want to lock up tenure, and you know, Blyth George is a hustler, so she doesn't mind wearing other hats. And so maintaining those community-based partnerships and research-based initiatives is something that's also super close to my heart. And that's why right now I'm trying to find a place to be a professor that's in the state, because officially Blyth George is probably glowing for how much radiation she gets from the planes going cross country, and I'm ready just to drive where I need to. My Mazda 3's gotten me to the most remote portions of the reservation, so she can drive anywhere in California. I know for a fact.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, so for Title 30, it's 38, it is still a thing. And I think if you know, for those who have read it and understand like how it coincides with the grant process and what that initial law was set up for, and then how it translates into like the travel ordinance, it is definitely more stringent than it needs to, and it is definitely a hindrance. And so if we're going to rely on grants, we need to also put money aside for positions that shouldn't have to strictly rely on grants, so that we can hire our own people. I 100% agree. So yeah, thank you for that. And I hope that you do get a teaching job in California. That would be amazing for us California Indians. Like regardless of the campus, we would always be able
Amen.
to kind of
I'll be
tap into
recruiting
that.
wherever I wind up. You guys will hear, trust me. Yes.
Thanks.
I had a follow-up to Shoshone's question. You know, in your work and your dissertation, and I think it's relevant to our work here at Two Feathers in the sense of the work with the youth and how to shape or develop or support them. One of the things you talk about is the difference between the worldview, taking it from the sort of starting point of looking at through worldview versus like norms and values. So my question is for you to talk about the importance of worldview and scripts and all of that as, you know, possibly a bit of a summary to what you just described in your presentation, but also just how we can use that worldview sort of concept or approach to helping to understand our young people better, and then at the same time intervene and put in programs that would be based on a worldview perspective.
Well, I love that question came up. It comes up quite frequently. I wasn't expecting it today, but I know it's an important one if it's coming up. So I think the big important difference between kind of norms and values, which is actually how a lot of sociology kind of thinks about culture, is that to chalk Pequan and the jump dance up to just norms and values doesn't quite feel like enough. Like there's so much that goes with just living and breathing the air up there that you know, it's a matter of how you see the world. It's how you walk in the world, and it's how you interpret your available choices of action and behaviors therein. And you know, the fact that those who live on and off reservation, they have access to this, you know, arguably maybe not in equal measures, because if you're on reservation, you're very fortunate to have direct proximity to some of our most sacred places. And that's actually unique across the scope of Indian country as a reservation to say that. Now, that being said, those off reservation make constant pilgrimage to these spaces. We know between family, between social connections, these things go back and forth. And that means that in certain ways, I think that if you are a World Renewal adherent, you got to make your peace with the fact that you're seeing the world a little different, and that your value system is based in something that is so much greater than any of the contemporary circumstances that we're going through right now. And you have to think of that as a source of strength, but you also have to realize sometimes it's going to be a little lonely. And I wish there's ways we could increase fellowship around those points. And a lot of it is actually just knowledge. You know, I came to so much of this knowledge, both through my project, but also just through a personal endeavor of like not having come from a dance family, but always knowing that the dances were there, of having had friends that I was jealous of because I'd see them in their regalia and covet being able to be part of that so very much. And I think there is real power and real prestige in shepherding that sacred knowledge, that if there's ways we can enhance our current efforts to get kids into dances and into ceremony and learning what it means to be a part of this rich heritage, the sooner the better. And if you're lucky and you get that information from family, you're in a position to teach your peers more about themselves. And you should feel both grateful that you were lucky enough to have those lessons, but also really feel the responsibility to be part of the larger world renewal heritage, to share them. And you know, I know everything seems like it's on pause right now, but one of the best parts about this project for me, what was kind of like a sigh of relief, was like halfway through my interviews, I realized what I was seeing. I was seeing the World Renewal worldview, and that I myself had always seen life through certain ways, like growing up off reservation, the way I relate to my family, the loyalty I have for my family. There's certain ties and the ways we were held accountable to each other that had its basis in this thing that I realized was alive and well, no matter what the people back east thought they knew. And so once I saw it and I knew it was alive, I just had to tap into it and do my job trying to describe it accurately. And so we have this huge resource that we can tap into. And I mean, I feel like we're already doing a lot just with everything going on. It's been like a huge pause, you know, but this gives us time to find other ways, because the cool thing about a world renewal worldview or any indigenous kind of orientation is that it's not static. These are things that were alive 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, well before then, and God willing, 1,000 years from now, right? But they're going to look different, they're going to taste different, they're going to feel different than they might have, you know, a couple of generations back. Mm-hmm.
And that was your last point, is kind of was a follow-up that I had, is because the world renewal worldview that you put out in your work is a combination of the past sort of mixing in with the present, that cultures, that traditions are fluid, are changing. And so this framework, or this, what you took from your research, in the sense of putting out that sort of world renewal worldview, is a combination of both the past and the present, and how the men are today, in terms of their behaviors being guided by both the present and the past. So just a little bit of, did I get it right?
Yes, no, I believe it. Yeah. And that's why we can't just paint the reservation as this place of inequality and disadvantage as we might urban neighborhoods that fit these characteristics. That it has been the collection point for marginalization and genocide, but that this worldview is living and breathing just like the landscape and the rivers so much before any of this other stuff. But we in real time adapt it to what we need now, and it, you know, it shows up in all these different ways.
Okay. And so I see, Charlie, we have a little bit of time left in Shoshone and Blyth. So, you know, as we're winding down, I'm wondering if there's any questions from the audience, or if any of us have any last questions, eager statements, or anything. Charlie?
I don't see any comment or questions in the comment section, but there is a lot of thanks and a lot of inspiration that is coming from our audience today. And I think I'm very much one of them people, just kind of following your lead in academia. You know, it's definitely something that kind of got me out of potential risks that may have been different for me if I were to have this passion and direction that I was grateful for from my family. And, you know, it definitely impacts me in some way or another, you know, being in I'm Kaduk, Hoopa, and Yurok. You know, my mom grew up on the Hoopa Valley Reservation. My dad grew up in Happy Camp, where we don't have a reservation, in a rural community. You know, being stigmatized as kind of a trouble kid. And so, you know, definitely a lot of the things that you're talking about impact me, or has impacted me at some point. So, you know, I definitely want to thank you again personally for, you know, the work you do, because it does kind of heal and validate a lot of our experiences, which could be instrumental in how we navigate the different worlds that we kind of are susceptible to. And so I really appreciate your work. I don't know if anyone else has any last words.
Yeah, I want to say that I appreciate you putting light to a lot of these issues, and it's easy for us. Like I live in Hoopa, right? So the Title 30 was a big one, and for men and for women too, and for Native women trying to, you know, support their families and stuff. It has been an obstacle, and we can say it to tribal council or to community members, but to have somebody outside of our town say it and put light to it does a lot for creating change in our communities. And also just the work, right? So like in our classrooms and universities across the nation, like you have Native people saying these things in psych classes or sociology classes, but now you have a point of reference that's written that you can refer to. So it is a huge contribution to the work that, and I think your model is really good. So I'm hoping that everybody gets an opportunity to see it and utilize it soon. For your book, I'm wondering, is it going to include some of the work that you referred to at the end of like more of like incorporating the family, or is it going to look just more in depth on the research that you have done? I'm just kind of curious about how that's going to come together.
Yeah, totally. Well, I want to say first off, thank you for just the chance to share my work. It's been something, you know, as an academic, you spend so much time thinking about these things in your own little head. And I gotta admit, I was a little nervous just because this is one of my first chances to share it with the people back home. And I've always said, like, you know, excuse my language, but fuck the guys at Harvard. It doesn't matter what they say. If you know, if the people back home, if I don't have my credentials there, like it doesn't matter. And so I'm just really grateful to have had the chance to share all of this. I had imagined my fancy doctor return to not have a sheet in the background. So I hope, you know, when everything's back and better, we can do this again together as we should. But for the book project, this is very much just a slice. So what I'm doing now is I've got the dissertation, which is just this huge, beautiful thing that I love, but actually dissertations don't exist in real world. It's an article or it's a book. And so right now I'm kind of peeling off slices that I could maybe tease. And so this is the first teaser of like, look at this worldview. It explains something that we've explained in other places differently, right? And then I have to decide what other chapter would be good as a supplement. But in the book, I introduce this worldview and I show the different ways it manifests, but before, and in particular, in the labor force and in expressions of fatherhood. But before I can reckon with that, there is a chapter on addiction and adversity, and how if we're asking why people aren't working, like there's a whole gap of like addiction and trauma that we as sociologists just aren't good at working with, you know. And you know, I guess we're lucky that they haven't had to work with it just to live. We maybe have, and so we can talk through things in a way that I'm hoping to be able to speak to, but it is such delicate work that I'm still very much kind of making my way through, you know, what are the connections I'm seeing in that chapter and what are the things I can speak to, because so much of the things that were shared with me, and it's something I hold myself to, that just because someone did share it doesn't mean I have to share it. And even though it helps me understand the narrative of that one individual, there are certain things that are too personal to share. And I don't think that all academic researchers always hold themselves to that standard. And if we're trying to make innovative research that is answering those kind of critiques, that's one of the first responsibilities I have as a researcher, particularly because I got to sleep here at night too. So I can't have anybody come in to ask what I've been doing, you know, unless it's to say good job. Yeah. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. So let's take it on home, Charlie.
Right on. So yeah, thanks again, Dr. Blyth George, for today's talk. Tomorrow we'll be finishing up this week with Delia Sharp, Executive Director of the California Tribal Family Coalition, where the topic of discussion will be ICWA. So I think that'll be an important way to kind of cap off today. And thanks again, you all, for tuning in and engaging with us, and see you soon. Too further is out.